A prison cell. A man who will never taste freedom again decides to talk. 64 years old, serving life. He confesses to 5 murders. But here's the part that changes everything. These murders happened in 1999, 26 years ago. And when these 5 people were killed, he was already locked up, already serving life behind bars. He didn't pull the trigger. He didn't need to. He gave the orders. From a cell, from isolation, and 5 people died. Now ask yourself this. If prison can't stop a man from ordering murders, what can? How do gang leaders control entire criminal empires when they can't even step outside? When they're buried in maximum security? How does their power reach the streets? That's the question we're answering today. And the answer is more disturbing than you think. This is the story of 4 men, all connected to the Mexican Mafia, all operated from behind bars, but their paths couldn't be more different. We're talking about Arizona and Southern California, 2 prison systems where gang leaders don't just survive, they build empires. The timeline, 1960s all the way to 2025, 60 years of control, 60 years of operations that never stopped. 3 of these men are still locked up, still running things, still giving orders that get carried out hundreds of miles away. 1 man walked away, left it all behind. To understand the scale here, we're talking about $85,000 moving through criminal networks every single week. Partnerships with Mexican cartels, drug distribution across state lines, and during the pandemic, a COVID unemployment fraud scheme run from prison involving 30 associates on the outside. These aren't stories from the past. This is happening right now, 2025. Men in maximum security isolation, controlling more than most people do with their freedom. So how does it work? How do you run an empire when you can't leave a cell? Let's find out. But before we get started, drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from, what city, what country, and what time is it right now where you are. From what city, what country? I want to see how far this reaches. Benjamin Peters, street name Topo. Let's start with what made him unusual. He wasn't Hispanic, and in the Mexican Mafia, that's almost impossible. Laeme is built on ethnic identity. It's in the name. But Peters found a way in anyway. He started with a street gang called Hoyo Soto. It doesn't exist anymore. But in the California gang landscape of the 1960s, it was his ticket, his entry point. Then came prison. The California prison system in the 1960s was brutal. Gang culture wasn't just part of life inside, it was life inside. You aligned with someone, or you didn't survive. Peters aligned with the Mexican Mafia. Now think about what that means. A non-Hispanic man joining an organization that defines itself by race, by heritage, by blood. But Peters proved himself. He adapted. He showed he was willing to do what needed to be done. And slowly, he rose. Not because of where he came from, because of what he was capable of. What Peters built during those years became the blueprint, the foundation, a system of control that didn't require him to be everywhere at once. Others would study what he did, and they'd take it further than he ever imagined. Peters understood something most people on the outside don't get. Prison isn't where power ends, it's where it gets concentrated. He helped build the hierarchy, the structure. Who reports to who collects money, who enforces the rules, who delivers punishment. And yes, he ordered murders. Not just enemies, his own people. Members who stepped out of line. Members who talked when they should have stayed quiet. Members who forgot their place in the organization. That's how you maintain control when you can't be everywhere. Fear, loyalty, and the understanding that no one is untouchable. But Peters wasn't just about violence. He set up drug trafficking routes, extortion networks, money flowing in and out of the prison. He created systems that kept running whether he was in solitary confinement or general population. The taxation system he put in place, still being used today. Street gangs on the outside pay tribute to laeme, a percentage of everything they make. Drugs, robberies, prostitution. Everything gets taxed. And if you don't pay, you get a visit. Or worse, a green light. A hit order that every member has to follow. Peters ran this for decades. Through prison transfers, through lockdowns, through federal investigations. The system worked. And it kept working long after Peters stopped being the one calling the shots. Benjamin Peters was convicted of murder, multiple murders. He got life. He's still in prison today, still serving that sentence. But what he built, that didn't go anywhere. The structure he created became the standard. The playbook. Every generation of Mexican Mafia leadership after him used what Peters put in place. His model proved something important. You don't need freedom to have power. You don't need to walk the streets to control them. The organizational hierarchy he established still functions. The taxation system still generates money. The enforcement methods still keep people in line. Peters showed that prison could be a headquarters, not a punishment, not an ending, a base of operations. And the men who came after him, they took that lesson and ran with it. They expanded the empire in ways Peters probably never imagined. Bigger networks, more money, connections that reached across borders. Starting with a kid from East Los Angeles, a kid who grew up in the Ramona Gardens projects, and turned that neighborhood into his own controlled territory. His name was Manuel Jackson, but on the streets, they called him Cricket. Manuel Larry Jackson, born mid-1970s in Monterey Park, California. But he didn't grow up there. He grew up in Ramona Gardens, East Los Angeles. If you're not familiar with Ramona Gardens, it's a housing project. The kind of place where gang culture isn't a choice you make. It's the air you breathe. Poverty, violence, limited options. The Hazard Gang controlled everything in that neighborhood. And for a kid growing up there, you had two paths. Join them or become a target. Jackson joined. He wasn't special at first. Just another young member, running errands, proving himself, doing what he was told. But Jackson had something that set him apart from the others. He was willing to go further. Willing to do things other people hesitated on. And in that world, hesitation gets you killed. Action gets you promoted. The environment shaped him. Ramona Gardens wasn't just where he lived. It was his training ground, his proving ground. And by the time he was a young adult, Jackson wasn't just a member of the Hazard Gang anymore. He was becoming someone people feared. Jackson didn't stay small time for long. He moved from street-level crime to something bigger, assaults, then executions, and he did them in broad daylight. No hesitation, no fear. The big Hazard Gang needed someone to run operations in Ramona Gardens, someone who could keep the neighborhood under control, someone who understood the territory because he came from it. Jackson got the job, and he turned that neighborhood into a controlled operation. Drug sales, extortion, enforcement, everything ran through him. But here's where Jackson took it to another level. He made a connection with the La Familia cartel, Mexican drug suppliers with serious resources, and suddenly, Jackson wasn't moving grams anymore. He was moving pounds, methamphetamine across Southern California. The money came in fast, the violence increased, territory expanded. Federal investigators noticed. They started building a case. RICO charges, prison violence, bank robbery, narcotics distribution, years of criminal activity documented and tracked. The investigation took time, but eventually they had enough. Jackson was arrested, convicted, sentenced, And most people would think that's where the story ends. It wasn't even close. They sent Manuel Jackson to ADX Florence, Colorado. ADX Florence is the most secure prison in America. Supermax, the place where they send people who are too dangerous for regular maximum security. Solitary confinement. 23 hours a day in a cell. 1 hour for exercise, alone. No contact with other inmates. Constant monitoring. For most people, that would be the end. Isolation breaks you down, takes away your influence, your connections, your power. But Jackson kept working. He sent letters, coded messages, instructions to members on the outside, and those messages got through. Drug deals, taxation routes, territory disputes, murders. All of it coordinated from a cell in Colorado. He issued green lights, hit orders. When Jackson wanted someone dead, they died. Even though he was locked in the most secure prison in the country. The weekly taxation network he controlled, $85,000 every single week. Money collected from street gangs, drug dealers, anyone operating in territories connected to the Mexican Mafia. That money didn't stop flowing just because Jackson was in ADX Florence. If anything, the operations got more organized, more structured, because Jackson learned what Peters had proven decades earlier. Prison isn't a barrier to power. It's just a different office. In 2025, Manuel Jackson pleaded guilty, racketeering, narcotics charges. The evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution had years of documented criminal activity. He's facing life in prison. No possibility of parole. Appeals were filed. Appeals were denied. Law enforcement assessment? Jackson is too dangerous for release. Ever. Even from maximum security isolation. His influence persists. His connections remain active. The networks he built continue to function. That's the reality of the Mexican Mafia. Leaders don't retire. They don't step down. They run operations until they die. And sometimes, even death doesn't stop the machine they built. But Jackson's story isn't the most disturbing one we're going to cover today. That belongs to a man in Arizona. A man who stayed silent for 26 years, and then decided to confess to everything. Paul Epinger, 64 years old, born around 1961. And here's what we know about his early life. Nothing. No public records of his childhood. No documented birthplace. No information about his family or how he got involved in gang life. That absence of information, that's unusual. Most gang members leave a trail. Arrests, court records, something. But Epinger? It's like his life didn't start until he was already deep in the organization. He's the alleged leader of the Arizona Mexican Mafia. And when we meet him in this story, he's already serving life in federal prison. Life in prison. Think about that. Whatever he did to earn that sentence happened before the crimes we're about to discuss, before the 5 murders, before the confession. So the question becomes, what did Paul Epinger do that was serious enough to put him away for life, before he orchestrated 5 more killings from his cell? We don't know, and maybe we never will. But what we do know is what happened in 1999. March through June 1999. Arizona. 5 people murdered. Thomas L. James, Benjamin Hernandez, Carol Romero, David Gano, Raul Sanchez. 5 separate killings, all connected to organized criminal activity, all linked to gang disputes, and all of them orchestrated by Paul Epinger from prison. These weren't random acts of violence. They were calculated, strategic. Each victim was killed for a specific reason. Disputes within the organization, power struggles, enforcement. The investigations went cold. No witnesses came forward. No one talked. That's how these organizations work. Silence is survival. For 26 years, these families had no answers, no closure, no justice. The cases sat in filing cabinets, cold cases, unsolved homicides that investigators couldn't crack, because everyone involved knew the rules. You don't talk. You don't cooperate. You don't testify. And if you do, you end up like Thomas, Benjamin, Carol, David, or Raul. So the cases stayed cold, year after year, until 2025. That's when Paul Epinger decided to confess to all of it. He laid out his involvement, the planning, the orders, the executions, everything. Why confess after 26 years? We don't know. Maybe age, maybe guilt, maybe a deal we're not aware of. But for the families of those 5 victims, it finally brought answers. It brought closure, and it brought confirmation that their loved ones hadn't been forgotten. But the 1999 murders weren't the only crimes Epinger was involved in from prison. Fast forward to 2020. The pandemic hits. The government rolls out emergency unemployment benefits. Billions of dollars flowing out to help people who lost their jobs. And Paul Epinger saw an opportunity. From his cell, he organized a fraud scheme. COVID-19 unemployment fraud. False claims submitted to state and federal governments. The network? 30 associates, all connected to the Arizona Mexican Mafia. Some inside prison, some on the outside. They submitted fake claims, used stolen identities, created false employment histories, and the money came in. This wasn't a small operation. This was organized, coordinated, and it ran for months before anyone noticed. Think about what that means. A man in federal prison, already serving life, orchestrating a multi-state fraud scheme during a global pandemic. He didn't have internet access. He didn't have a phone. He didn't have freedom. But he had a network, he had loyalty, and he had people willing to carry out his instructions. The scheme eventually got caught. Pandemic fraud investigations swept through the country. Federal agents tracked the money, followed the connections, and it all led back to Epinger. State and federal charges, conspiracy, fraud, theft of government funds, and this time he couldn't stay silent. 2025, Pinal County Courts, Arizona. Paul Epinger pleaded guilty to the fraud charges, to the 5 murders from 1999. All of it. The sentencing? 25 years for each murder. That's 125 years, added on top of the life sentence he was already serving. Let's be clear about what that means. Epinger was never getting out. He knew that. Everyone knew that. But the courts wanted to send a message. Even if you're already serving life, we will add more time. We will make sure there's accountability for every crime. The legal significance goes beyond just Epinger. His confession helped close 5 cold cases. It gave prosecutors evidence they didn't have before. It confirmed what investigators suspected but couldn't prove. And it demonstrated something law enforcement already knew but couldn't stop. Prison doesn't end gang activity. Supermax confinement doesn't eliminate influence. Life sentences don't stop operations. Paul Epinger controlled criminal activity from maximum security for decades. And he's still there. Still serving multiple life sentences. Still connected to the organization. The question isn't whether prison can hold him. It's whether prison can actually stop him. And based on the evidence, the answer is no. Now let's talk about the 4th man. The one who chose a different path. Manuel Medrano. Born sometime in the late 1960s or early 1970s, he went to prison at 17 years old. And he didn't get out until he was 37. 20 years. 2 decades of his life behind bars. His crimes? Armed robbery, drug trafficking. The kind of charges that come with serious time. But here's what happens when you're 17 years old in prison. You're vulnerable. You're a target. And you need protection. The Arizona Mexican Mafia offered that protection. But protection comes with a price. Medrano joined, not because he wanted to, because he had to, because that's how you survive. He learned the rules, a hierarchy, the code. You do what you're told. You don't ask questions. You prove your loyalty through violence. And Medrano proved himself. He rose through the ranks, became someone the organization trusted, someone they relied on. He witnessed the brutality firsthand. Stabbings, beatings, murders. The kind of violence that happens when rules get broken, when loyalty gets questioned. For 20 years, that was his life. That was his identity. Mexican Mafia. A member of one of the most feared prison gangs in America. And then, something changed. Leaving the Mexican Mafia isn't like quitting a job. You don't just walk away. In most cases, leaving means death. A green light gets issued. You become a target, and someone in the organization will find you. But Medrano made the decision anyway. We don't know exactly what the turning point was. Maybe it was watching too many people die. Maybe it was realizing he'd spent his entire adult life in a cage. Maybe it was something else. But at some point, Medrano decided the life wasn't worth it. The process of leaving cost him everything. Protection, gone. Brotherhood, gone. Identity, gone. He had to rebuild from nothing, and he had to do it with a target on his back. When he got out at 37, he had a prison record, gang affiliations, no job skills, no legitimate connections. Most people in that situation, they go right back, because there's nowhere else to go. But Medrano didn't go back. He started over, completely. And he did something almost no one does. He turned his knowledge of gang life into something positive. Something that could actually help people. Instead of recruiting, he started preventing recruitment.